Since Donald Trump wants to use methods of deception, misinformation, and other methods of strategic weaponized narcissism, I shall post here the original charges of allegations of his impeachment. He should not still be issuing any orders of any type. The other branches of government have proven their inefficiency to uphold their duties. There does not need to be any proof. No trial is necessary these charges, and his actions prove beyond a doubt that he is incapable of performing his duties as the chief executive officer. And not only are the other branches incapable of performing their duty to this task, but he has altered the very archives that detail the outline of what can be done, as you'll see here. This process that is set in place for situations like this completely conflicts with the narrative he's trying to use to escape being charged with high treason and retaliates with further abuse of power.
Memorandum to the Justices of the Supreme Court of the United States. The members of their United States Senate, subject, an analysis of executive action and its alignment with the American system of government, date, August 14, 2025. This document presents a detailed analysis of a series of executive actions, public statements, and administrative policies, evaluating them against the foundational principles of the American system of government, including the separation of powers, the rule of law, and established democratic norms. The analysis is grounded in constitutional law, historical precedent, and established political science frameworks for assessing the health of democratic institutions, given the constitutional responsibilities of the judiciary to interpret the law and of their Senate to provide advice and consent, conduct oversight, and serve as the court of impeachment. The detailed information and patterns of conduct identified herein are presented for your consideration. An analysis of executive action and its alignment with their American system of government. Section I, the American establishment, constitutional principles, and democratic norms. To evaluate any set of actions against the American system of government, one must first establish a clear and rigorous definition of that system. The American establishment of government is not a clandestine group of elites, but rather the formal, constitutionally defined framework of governance, buttressed by a set of historically developed norms and principles that guide its operation. This system, born from a profound skepticism of concentrated power, was deliberately engineered to be a complex, often slow-moving apparatus designed to protect liberty, uphold the rule of law, and ensure that the government derives its power from the consent of their governed. Its core components are the separation of powers, a robust system of checks and balances, the supremacy of the rule of law, and a collection of unwritten democratic norms that facilitate its function. Understanding these foundational pillars is essential for any analysis of actions that may support, challenge, or seek to dismantle it. 1.1 The constitutional architecture, separation of powers and checks and balances. The cornerstone of the American governmental structure is the principle of separation of powers, a concept deeply informed by the political philosophy of thinkers like Charles de Montesquieu and woven into the fabric of the U.S. Constitution. 1 The framers, having experienced the tyranny of a monarch and the inadequacies of a weak central government under the Articles of Confederation, sought a novel solution. Their central fear was the aggregation of power in a single entity, which they viewed as the very definition of tyranny. 2 Their solution was to divide the federal government into 3 distinct and co-equal branches: the legislative, the executive, and their judicial. 4 The legislative branch, embodied by Congress, is granted the power to make laws. The executive branch, headed by the President, is charged with executing those laws. The judicial branch, with the Supreme Court at its apex, is responsible for interpreting the laws and the Constitution itself. For this formal division of labor ensures that no single branch can unilaterally control the state. For example, while the President is there, Commander-in-Chief of the military, only Congress has the power to declare war and, crucially, to appropriate the funds necessary to pay for and provision the armed forces. This design necessitates that both branches must consent for the nation to engage in war, a clear mechanism to prevent executive overreach in the most consequential of state actions. This separation, however, is not absolute. The framers understood that a simple division of functions was insufficient to prevent the encroachment of one branch upon another. As James Madison famously argued in Federalist No. 51, because it is impossible to make all politicians angels, the structure of government itself must furnish the necessary controls. Ambition, he wrote, must be made to counteract ambition. This is the essence of the system of checks and balances, a complex web of overlapping authorities and mutual veto points designed to ensure that power is shared and that cooperation is a prerequisite for action. 5. This system of shared powers manifests in numerous ways. 1. The President can veto legislation passed by Congress, but Congress can override that veto with a 2/3 vote in both chambers. The legislative branch makes the laws, but the judicial branch can declare those laws unconstitutional through the power of judicial review. 6. The President nominates federal judges, ambassadors, and other high-ranking officials, but the Senate must provide its advice and consent for these appointments to take effect. Congress holds the power of the purse, controlling the budget for all executive branch functions, and possesses the ultimate check of impeachment and removal from office for the President and other federal officials. 6. The judiciary, in turn, depends on the executive branch to enforce its rulings, creating a necessary interdependence. 5. The intentional result of this architecture is a government that is often slow and deliberative. The framers intended for policy making to be a long, complex process, believing that this friction was a necessary safeguard for liberty. This structure ensures that multiple constituencies and points of view are considered and that broad consensus is often required to enact significant change. It provides citizens with multiple access points to influence policy. If one branch is unresponsive, citizens can appeal to another. This intricate design is not a flaw but a central feature, a constitutional bulwark against the rapid imposition of a tyrannical will. The system's resilience, therefore, is not just in its formal rules but in the dynamic interplay and negotiation they compel among the branches. 1.2 The supremacy of the rule of law, flowing directly from the constitutional structure, is the foundational principle of their rule of law. At its core, the rule of law dictates that all individuals and institutions, including the government itself, are accountable to laws that are publicly promulgated, equally enforced, and independently adjudicated. 3. It is the concept that the law is supreme, operating as a safeguard against the untrammeled discretionary power of those in authority. 3. In the American system, no one is above the law, from the average citizen to the President of the United States. This principle is enshrined in the Constitution's mandate that the President take care that the laws be faithfully executed. It is animated by the existence of an independent judiciary, which serves as the ultimate arbiter of legal and constitutional questions. 5. The courts interpret the laws passed by Congress and signed by the President, and their decisions are binding on the other branches. While judges are nominated by the President and confirmed by the Senate, their lifetime appointments are designed to insulate them from the political pressures of the moment, allowing them to render judgments based on law and fact rather than partisan favor. 9. The President, in this framework, is a temporary public servant whose designated powers are constrained by this legal and constitutional order. 10. The authority of their government is derived from the will of the people, and that authority is exercised in accordance with the rule of law. 8. This means that any wrongdoing by the chief executive, whether in an official or private capacity, must be subject to investigation and potential prosecution by independent institutions. 10. The justice system is expected to deliver fair and timely trials, uphold due process, and ensure that law enforcement agencies are accountable and transparent. 10. The rule of law is therefore the bedrock of democratic stability. It ensures predictability, protects fundamental rights, and provides a non-violent mechanism for resolving disputes. When the rule of law is respected, citizens and institutions can have confidence that the rules of the game are stable and will be applied fairly to all. An assault on the rule of law, whether through the selective enforcement of laws, defiance of court orders, or the politicization of the justice system, is an assault on the very foundation of the American Republic. 1.3 The unwritten Constitution, the function of democratic norms. While the Constitution provides the formal architecture of American government, its successful operation has always depended on a set of unwritten rules, expectations, and practices known as democratic norms. 7. These informal rules of the game or soft guardrails govern the behavior of political actors and are essential for maintaining stability, fostering cooperation, and ensuring that political competition does not descend into existential conflict. 11. Key democratic norms include mutual toleration. The idea that political opponents are not enemies of the state but legitimate contenders for power, and institutional forbearance, the practice of restraining the exercise of one's legal power to avoid crippling the system. 7. For example, while the Senate majority has the raw power to eliminate the filibuster for legislation, the norm of forbearance has, for long periods, prevented them from doing so to preserve the rights of the minority. Similarly, their norm of respecting the legitimacy of election results and facilitating a peaceful transfer of power is a cornerstone of American democracy, though it is mentioned nowhere in the Constitution's text. 9. These norms are vital because they allow a system of creaking and bending to function without breaking. 12. They include principles like respect for the professional, non-partisan civil service, the independence of the Justice Department from raw political interference, and the acceptance of a free and independent press as a crucial element of diagonal accountability. 8. When these norms are strong, political discourse tends to remain civil and constructive, and public trust in institutions is maintained. 7. The erosion of these norms poses a profound threat to the democratic system. When political actors begin to violate these unwritten rules, by, for instance, delegitimizing elections, attacking the judiciary as partisan, or treating political opponents as traitors, it can lead to a rapid increase in polarization and a decline in public trust. 7. This erosion can be more insidious than a direct assault on the Constitution's text, as it hollows out the system from within. A government can maintain the outward forms of democracy, elections, a legislature, courts, while the substantive norms that make it function have been destroyed. Therefore, a comprehensive analysis of any leader's impact on the American system of government must assess not only their adherence to the letter of the law but also their respect for the unwritten norms that give that law its democratic meaning. The formal structure of checks and balances is necessary, but it is not sufficient. Its resilience depends on the shared commitment of political actors to both the written and unwritten rules of the democratic process. Section 2, a framework for analysis, identifying democratic backsliding. To move from a description of the American system of government to an objective analysis of actions that may undermine it, a clear analytical framework is required. The field of political science offers a robust set of concepts and indicators for identifying and measuring the decline of democratic health, a phenomenon often referred to as democratic backsliding or democratic erosion. This framework allows for an evaluation that is grounded in established scholarship rather than partisan sentiment, providing a structured lens through which to assess the evidence. By defining their mechanisms of democratic decline and identifying the key behavioral indicators associated with it, one can systematically analyze whether a given set of actions aligns with patterns of democratic resilience or democratic erosion. 2.1 Defining democratic erosion and backsliding. Democratic backsliding is broadly defined as the state-led debilitation or elimination of any of the political institutions that sustain an existing democracy. 13. This process involves the hollowing out of democratic institutions, processes, and norms, leading to a regime change toward autocracy where the exercise of political power becomes more arbitrary and repressive. 13. A crucial feature of modern democratic backsliding is that it is often a slow, incremental, and episodic process, rather than a sudden event, like a military coup. 15. This gradual nature makes it particularly difficult to identify. As scholars Stephen Levitsky and Daniel Ziblatt note, it is challenging to pinpoint a single specific moment at which a government is no longer democratic, as the decline manifests slowly, in barely visible steps. 14. This process is frequently led by democratically elected leaders, who use the very tools of democracy to subvert it. They may maintain a veneer of democracy, holding elections and preserving formal institutions, while systematically undermining their substance. 15. This phenomenon has been termed stealth authoritarianism, which describes their practice of an authoritarian-minded leader using seemingly legitimate legal mechanisms for anti-democratic ends, concealing anti-democratic practices under the mask of law. 14. This can involve manipulating electoral rules, undermining judicial independence through legal appointments, or restricting media freedom through libel laws or regulatory pressure. 14. The use of legal and quasi-legal means to erode democracy from within is a hallmark of contemporary democratic backsliding. Therefore, an analysis must look beyond simple illegality and examine how legal authority itself can be weaponized to weaken democratic checks and balances. 2.2 Key indicators of authoritarian behavior. To operationalize the concept of democratic backsliding, political scientists have developed a litmus test to identify authoritarian behavior in elected leaders. This test, developed by Levitsky and Ziblatt, focuses on 4 key behavioral indicators that serve as warning signs of a leader's anti-democratic intentions. 14. These indicators provide a clear, non-partisan set of criteria against which a leader's words and actions can be measured. The 4 key indicators are: 1. Rejection of, or weak commitment to, democratic rules of the game. This is evident when leaders refuse to accept credible election results, suggest unconstitutional changes to the system, such as postponing elections or ignoring term limits, or attempt to undermine the legitimacy of core democratic institutions like the courts or the legislature. 2. Denial of the legitimacy of political opponents. This indicator is present when leaders describe their rivals not as fellow citizens with a different point of view, but as criminals, subversives, or enemies of the state who pose an existential threat to the nation. This rhetoric goes beyond normal political attacks and seeks to delegitimize the opposition's right to compete for and hold power. 3. Toleration or encouragement of violence. This can range from tacitly encouraging violence by supporters to praising or pardoning those who have committed politically motivated violence. It may also involve threatening opponents with violence or using paramilitary or law enforcement groups to intimidate rivals. 4. Readiness to curtail the civil liberties of opponents, including the media. This includes actions to restrict freedom of speech and the press, such as threatening to sue or shut down critical media outlets, as well as using state power, such as tax authorities or the justice system, to investigate and punish critics, political rivals, and civil society organizations. These 4 indicators form the core of the analytical framework for this report. Their subsequent sections will systematically evaluate the public record of Donald Trump's actions and rhetoric against these 4 criteria. 2.3 Mechanisms of erosion, executive aggrandizement and accountability. Democratic backsliding typically occurs through specific mechanisms that weaken the checks on a leader's power. One of the most common is executive aggrandizement, which refers to the expansion of a leader's power beyond their checks and balances provided by the other branches of government. 14. A legitimately elected leader can cause democratic erosion by using their executive authority to interfere with the independence of the judiciary, weaken the oversight capacity of their legislature, or politicize the non-partisan civil service. 14. This process involves a systematic attack on the different forms of accountability that constrain executive power. Political scientists identify three main types of accountability. Horizontal accountability. These are the formal checks and balances exerted by other state institutions, such as courts, legislatures, and independent agencies. 13. Executive aggrandizement is, by definition, an attack on horizontal accountability. Vertical accountability. This is the accountability of leaders to the public, primarily through free and fair elections. 13. Actions that undermine confidence in election outcomes, disenfranchise voters, or manipulate electoral rules are attacks on vertical accountability. Diagonal accountability. This form of accountability is exerted by independent media and civil society organizations that hold the government to account. 13. Efforts to silence critical media outlets, harass journalists, or restrict the activities of non-governmental organizations are attacks on diagonal accountability. A comprehensive strategy of democratic erosion will often involve weakening all three forms of accountability simultaneously. The relationship between a leader's norm-breaking behavior and their popular support can create a dangerous feedback loop. A leader's willingness to attack established institutions and norms can be a core part of their charismatic appeal to a segment of the electorate that feels left behind, or disdains the political establishment. 16. This popular support, in turn, can make their leader's political party less willing or able to act as an institutional check, for fear of alienating its own base. 16. In this dynamic, the very actions that weaken democratic institutions are electorally rewarded, which emboldens the leader to engage in further norm-breaking, accelerating the process of backsliding. The following table organizes the analysis of this report, linking the key indicators of authoritarian behavior to the specific categories of actions that will be examined in the subsequent sections. This structure ensures that the evaluation is systematic and directly tied to the established academic framework, indicator of authoritarian behavior manifestation locus of analysis in this report. Rejection of democratic rules of the game, undermining the legitimacy of elections, refusing to accept defeat, attacking judicial independence, proposing unconstitutional actions. Section 4.1. Section 4.2, Denial of the legitimacy of political opponents, describing rivals as criminals. Section 4, Analysis of actions, the judiciary and the electoral process. The American system of government rests on two pillars that are external to their executive branch but essential for its constraint: an independent judiciary capable of checking the legality and constitutionality of executive actions, and a free and fair electoral process that ensures the government's accountability to the people. Actions that seek to undermine the legitimacy of these two institutions strike at the very heart of the constitutional order. An attack on the judiciary's independence erodes horizontal accountability, while an attack on the integrity of elections corrodes their foundation of vertical accountability. This section analyzes the administration's record on judicial appointments and its rhetoric concerning the courts, as well as its sustained campaign to challenge the legitimacy of the electoral process and the peaceful transfer of power. 4.1 The federal judiciary, appointments and legitimacy. The power to appoint federal judges is one of a president's most significant and lasting legacies. The Trump administration made reshaping the federal judiciary a top priority, successfully appointing 3 Supreme Court justices, 54 appellate court judges, and 174 district court judges in a single term, a pace and volume that significantly outstripped that of previous administrations. 38. This effort has had a profound impact on the ideological composition of the courts, entrenching a conservative majority on the Supreme Court and shifting the balance of several circuit courts of appeals. 39. The administration's appointment philosophy was characterized by a focus on two key attributes: conservative ideology and youth. Nominees were often selected in close consultation with outside conservative groups, most notably the Federalist Society, which played an outsized role in vetting and recommending candidates. 41. This ensured a high degree of ideological alignment with the administration's goals. Furthermore, the administration prioritized the appointment of young judges, with the average age of its appellate appointees being just 47. 39. Because federal judges have lifetime tenure, this strategy ensures that the administration's judicial legacy will shape American jurisprudence for decades to come. One analysis found that due to their younger age, Trump-appointed judges will serve an estimated 270 more years on their bench than those appointed by the Obama administration. 40. This rapid and transformative appointment process was not without controversy. A significant number of Trump's nominees were rated not qualified by the Nonpartisan American Bar Association, ABA, which evaluates candidates on their professional competence, integrity, and judicial temperament. 38. In just over 9 months, the administration nominated 4 individuals who received this rating, doubling the total number of such nominees since 1989. 42. One nominee, Brett Tully, was rated unanimously not qualified due to a profound lack of trial experience, having practiced law for less than 3 years. 42. Another, Steve Grass, was deemed not qualified by the ABA over concerns that he could not detach himself from his deeply held social agenda and political loyalty to be able to judge objectively. 42. The administration and its allies in the Senate dismissed these concerns, pushing their nominees through the confirmation process and, in the process, launching a campaign to delegitimize the ABA itself. 42. Complementing the appointment strategy was a sustained pattern of public rhetoric, aimed at delegitimizing the judiciary as an institution, particularly when it produced rulings adverse to the administration's agenda. This directly corresponds to their authoritarian indicator of rejecting the democratic rules of the game by undermining the legitimacy of a co-equal branch of government. 14. President Trump frequently attacked individual judges in personal and political terms, a sharp departure from their presidential norm of respecting the judiciary's independence. He famously derided a judge who ruled against his asylum policy as an Obama judge, prompting a rare public rebuke from Chief Justice John Roberts, who stated, "We do not have Obama judges or Trump judges. What we have is an extraordinary group of dedicated judges, doing their level best to do equal right to those appearing before them." 43. Trump rejected this sentiment, tweeting in response, "Sorry Chief Justice John Roberts, but you do indeed have Obama judges." 43. This pattern was repeated throughout his presidency. He called judges who ruled against him rogue and lunatics, described the court system as broken and unfair, and labeled specific rulings a disgrace. 43. He repeatedly attacked the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit, one of the most liberal-leaning circuits, as a complete and total disaster and suggested it should be broken up. 43. He also publicly demanded that Supreme Court Justices Sonia Sotomayor and Ruth Bader Ginsburg recuse themselves from any cases involving him, citing their perceived political bias. 43. This rhetoric serves to reframe the judiciary in the public mind, transforming it from an impartial arbiter of the law into just another political arena. When a court rules against the president, this narrative suggests it is not because of a good faith legal disagreement, but because of the partisan bias of a rogue judge. This delegitimization of any institution that can produce an outcome contrary to the president's wishes is a key tactic of democratic erosion, as it seeks to replace their principle of the rule of law with the principle of personal political victory as the sole measure of legitimacy. 4.2 The integrity of elections and the peaceful transfer of power. No aspect of the American democratic system is more fundamental than the integrity of its elections and the norm of a peaceful transfer of power. These are their mechanisms of vertical accountability, through which the people hold their leaders to account. A sustained campaign to undermine public confidence in this process represents a direct assault on the foundations of the Republic. The public record reveals a multi-year effort by Donald Trump and his allies to baselessly discredit the American electoral system, culminating in an unprecedented attempt to overturn their results of the 2020 presidential election and obstruct the peaceful transfer of power. This effort began long before the 2020 election. Despite winning the presidency in 2016, Trump immediately and repeatedly made the false claim that millions of illegal votes had cost him the popular vote. 45 He convened a sham commission on election integrity to investigate these baseless claims, an endeavor that was ultimately disbanded after finding no evidence of widespread fraud. 47 This rhetoric continued throughout his presidency, with frequent, unsubstantiated allegations of a rigged system and fraudulent mail-in ballots. 49 This pattern of making baseless claims of fraud serves to preemptively discredit any election that might result in a loss, a tactic that political scientists have identified as a clear rejection of the democratic rules of the game. 45 This campaign escalated dramatically following his defeat in the 2020 presidential election. Refusing to concede, Trump and his campaign launched what the January 6 committee would later describe as a multi-part conspiracy to overturn their election results. 50 This conspiracy involved several lines of effort. First, a massive public disinformation campaign, often referred to as the Big Lie, which promoted false claims of rigged voting machines, stuffed ballot boxes, and a coordinated international plot to steal the election. 50 These claims were widely disseminated through social media, rallies, and allied media outlets, despite being repeatedly debunked by election officials from both parties. The Attorney General and the Director of the Cyber Security and Infrastructure Security Agency. 49 Second, a legal campaign consisting of 62 lawsuits filed in multiple states challenging the election results. 54 While the campaign alleged widespread fraud in public, these claims were rarely made in court, where lawyers are subject to professional sanctions for making false statements. The vast majority of these lawsuits were dismissed by judges, including many appointed by Trump himself, for lack of evidence or lack of legal standing. 54 In the end, the legal challenges failed to alter the outcome in any state. Third, a political pressure campaign targeting state and federal officials. This included a now infamous phone call in which Trump pressured Georgia's Secretary of State, Brad Raffensperger, to find 11,780 votes. 50 It also involved a scheme to have Republican-controlled state legislatures submit alternate, fraudulent slates of electors to Congress, and an intense effort to pressure Vice President Mike Pence to unilaterally reject certified electoral votes during the joint session of Congress on January 6, 2021. A power the Vice President does not possess. 50 The culmination of this effort was the attack on the U.S. Capitol on January 6, 2021. After summoning his supporters to Washington for a rally, Trump instructed them to march to the Capitol to take back their country, knowing that many were angry and some were armed. 52 As the violent mob reached the Capitol, forcing Congress to evacuate and temporarily halting the peaceful transfer of power, Trump watched their events unfold on television and, for hours, ignored pleas from his advisers to call off the attack. 52 The House Select Committee to investigate the January 6 attack on their United States Capitol concluded that Trump was the central cause of their insurrection and, in an unprecedented move, issued 4 criminal referrals to their Department of Justice, recommending that he be prosecuted for obstruction of an official proceeding, conspiracy to defraud the United States, conspiracy to make a false statement, and inciting or assisting an insurrection. 52 This entire sequence of events, from the years of delegitimizing rhetoric to the final, violent attempt to prevent the certification of the election, represents the most direct and severe challenge to the American electoral process and the norm of peaceful power transfer in the nation's history. It attempted to transform the ministerial, constitutionally mandated process of counting electoral votes into a political contest, where the outcome could be rejected by the losing candidate. Section V, A Blueprint for Transformation, Project 2025. The actions and rhetoric analyzed in the preceding sections do not exist in a vacuum. They are consistent with, and in many cases directly reflected in, a comprehensive and premeditated plan for a second Trump administration known as Project 2025, authored by the Conservative Heritage Foundation in partnership with over 100 other right-wing organizations and staffed by numerous former Trump administration officials. Project 2025 is far more than a collection of policy papers. It is a detailed, 920-page operational blueprint for a radical restructuring of the executive branch, designed to consolidate power in the presidency and systematically dismantle the modern administrative state. 58 Understanding this project is crucial, as it codifies their strategies and goals observed throughout the Trump presidency, transforming what might have appeared as ad hoc norm-breaking into a coherent and systematic agenda for altering their fundamental structure of American governance. 5.1 The stated goal, deconstructing the administrative state. The explicit goal of Project 2025, as stated by its leaders, is to go to work on day one, to deconstruct the administrative state. 60 This mission is rooted in an aggressive and expansive interpretation of the unitary executive theory, which, as previously discussed, posits that the president has complete control over the executive branch. 18 The project's authors argue that the vast federal bureaucracy, with its independent agencies and career civil servants, has become an unaccountable fourth branch of government that is biased toward liberalism and thwarts the will of the elected president. 61 Their solution is to bring this entire apparatus under direct presidential command. To achieve this, Project 2025 is built on 4 pillars. 59 The first is the policy manual itself, the mandate for leadership, which provides chapter-by-chapter instructions for abolishing or restructuring every federal agency. The second is a personnel database, a concerted effort to collect and vet thousands of resumes from individuals deemed loyal to the America First agenda, with the goal of replacing up to 50,000 non-partisan civil servants with political appointees who pass a MAGA loyalty test. 59 The third is a presidential administration academy to train these incoming appointees. The fourth is a 180-day playbook of executive orders and actions to be implemented immediately upon taking office. This combination of a detailed policy plan and a pre-vetted personnel pipeline is designed to overcome the institutional resistance that the first Trump administration faced from the permanent bureaucracy and the established legal order. It is a direct response to the checks provided by career officials and independent watchdogs, aiming to remove those obstacles entirely. This would allow a second administration to implement its agenda with a speed and thoroughness that was not possible in their first, fundamentally altering the balance of power between the temporary political leadership and the permanent administrative state. Critics have described the project as an authoritarian, Christian nationalist plan that would undermine the rule of law, their separation of powers, and civil liberties. steering the United States toward autocracy. 61 5.2 Proposed restructuring of key institutions. The mandate for leadership plays out a comprehensive plan to reshape virtually every facet of the federal government. The proposals aim to gut checks and balances and centralize power in a manner that would fundamentally alter their relationship between the branches of government and between the state and its citizens. 59 A central target of the project is the Department of Justice, DOJ. The plan calls for a thorough politicization of the department, empowering the president to use the DOJ and FBI to target political opponents. 59 It suggests re-examining the post-Watergate norms that limit contact between the White House and the DOJ on specific investigations, a move that would erase the firewall designed to prevent politically motivated prosecutions. 63 The plan proposes conducting a review of all major FBI investigations to ensure they conform to the president's political agenda and vastly expanding the number of political appointees in every component of the department to promote the president's agenda. 62 Any employee who fails to obey the direction of a political appointee, even if that direction is illegal or unconstitutional, could be immediately replaced. 62 This would transform the DOJ from the nation's chief law enforcement body into an instrument of presidential will. The project also seeks to fundamentally remake the federal civil service. Their personnel database is designed to work in tandem with the re-implementation of Schedule F, allowing for the mass firing of career employees and their replacement with pre-vetted loyalists. 60 This would eliminate the merit-based system and ensure that the entire federal workforce is beholden to the executive, compromising their ability of civil servants to uphold the law and serve the public impartially. 59 Furthermore, Project 2025 advocates for the complete dismantling or gutting of entire federal agencies. It calls for the elimination of the Department of Education, with its functions returned to the states, and the abolition of programs like Head Start. 59 It proposes restructuring the Department of Homeland Security and gutting the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, CISA, the very agency that helps protect U.S. elections from cyber attacks. 61 It also calls for downsizing the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA, due to its work on climate change. 60 This structural transformation is intended to serve a broader, radical policy agenda. The project calls for using a 19th century anti-obscenity law, the Comstock Act, to effectively ban abortion nationwide by criminalizing the mailing of any abortion-related materials. 58 It proposes ending all diversity, equity, and inclusion programs across the federal government and directing the DOJ to prosecute anti-white racism instead. 61 It recommends the mass deportation of undocumented immigrants, using the military for domestic law enforcement, ending birthright citizenship, and rescinding non-discrimination protections for LGBTQ+ Americans. 58 The following table provides a summary of the transformation envisioned by Project 2025 for key federal institutions, contrasting their established role in the American system of government with their proposed new function. Federal institution, concept established role in American government, proposed Project 2025, restructuring Department of Justice, DOJ, independent, nonpartisan, administration of justice, upholding the rule of law for all citizens. 3. Instrument for investigating political opponents, protecting allies, and advancing the president's personal and political agenda. 62 Federal Civil Service merit-based, expert, and nonpartisan implementation of laws passed by Congress. 26 Staffed by political loyalists, under Schedule F, subject to at-will dismissal for insufficient fealty to their president's agenda. 19 Independent agencies, for example, EPA, Federal Reserve, rulemaking and enforcement based on congressional statute. scientific expertise, and economic data, with a degree of insulation from direct political control. 6. Subject to direct presidential control, leaders fired, capacity gutted, and actions dictated by political priorities rather than statutory mandates. 59. Department of Education administering federal completely eliminated, with education law, distributing, funding, and enforcing civil rights in education. 64. Authority and funding returned to the states and taxpayer dollars redirected to private and religious schools. 59. This blueprint, in its scope and ambition, represents the most comprehensive plan for a top-down reorganization of the federal government in modern American history. It is not a plan for reform within the existing system, but a plan to systematically deconstruct that system and replace it with one characterized by highly centralized and personalized executive power. Section V, Synthesis and Conclusion. An assessment of impact on the American system of government. The preceding analysis has examined a wide array of public activities, executive orders, administrative policies, judicial appointments, public rhetoric, and actions concerning the electoral process, through the lens of America's foundational, governing principles and established frameworks for identifying democratic backsliding. To answer the central question of whether these actions work towards, against, or toward the dismantling of the American system of government, it is necessary to synthesize these disparate data points into a coherent assessment, identifying the overarching patterns that emerge from the evidence. 6.1 Identifying overarching patterns of action and rhetoric. When viewed in aggregate, the actions and rhetoric documented in this report reveal three consistent and interconnected patterns that define the Trump presidency's relationship with the American system of government. First, there is a clear and persistent pattern of centralizing power in the executive branch. This is evident in the aggressive use of executive orders to pursue a sweeping, deregulatory agenda that bypasses Congress. 20. The assertion of a unitary executive theory that claims virtually unchecked authority over the administrative state. 17. The federal takeover of local law enforcement in Washington, D.C. 32. And the plan to reclassify the civil service under Schedule F, which would bring the federal workforce under direct political control. 19. These actions consistently seek to expand presidential authority at the expense of the other branches of government and the traditional independence of the bureaucracy, a classic manifestation of executive aggrandizement. Second, there is a systematic pattern of delegitimizing opposing institutions and norms. This is a strategy aimed at undermining public trust in any institution, process, or norm that serves as a check on presidential power or is capable of producing an outcome contrary to the president's wishes. This pattern includes the sustained, rhetorical attacks on the judiciary, labeling judges as partisan actors and courts as illegitimate. 43, the relentless and baseless claims that the electoral system is rigged and rife with fraud, which erodes public faith in the cornerstone of democratic accountability. 45, and the denigration of the free press as the enemy of the people. This behavior aligns directly with the key authoritarian indicators of rejecting democratic rules and denying the legitimacy of the institutional framework that enforces them. 14, if an election is lost, it is declared fraudulent. If a court rules unfavorably, the judge is branded as corrupt. This creates a political environment where the only legitimate authority is that which affirms the leader's power. Third, there is a distinct pattern of personalizing power. This involves framing their functions of the state, particularly the instruments of law and justice, not as tools for the impartial service of the public but as weapons to be used for personal and political retribution. This is most apparent in the actions and rhetoric concerning their Department of Justice, including the public calls to prosecute political rivals, their launching of investigations into critics like Letitia James and Adam Schiff, and their promise to use the Dodge to seek accountability for the wrongs and abuses of their previous administration. 29. This pattern extends to the pardoning of individuals convicted of politically motivated violence on the president's behalf, as seen with their January 6 rioters, which aligns with the indicator of tolerating and encouraging violence. 50. This reframing of state power from an impersonal, law-bound authority to a personal, loyalty-based instrument is a profound departure from the principles of American constitutionalism. 6.2 Conclusion: working towards, against, or dismantling the system. Based on a meticulous analysis of the public record, the conclusion of this report is that the documented patterns of action and rhetoric are fundamentally inconsistent with the goal of working towards or strengthening the established American system of government. That system, as defined in Section I, is predicated on the separation of powers, mutual checks and balances, the supremacy of the rule of law, and a respect for democratic norms. The evidence overwhelmingly demonstrates that the actions in question systematically work against these core principles by seeking to weaken, bypass, or neutralize the structural and normative guardrails that define the American republic. The assertion of unilateral executive power works against the principle of shared power with Congress. The delegitimization of the judiciary works against the principle of an independent judiciary and the rule of law. The campaign to discredit elections and obstruct the peaceful transfer of power works against the foundational principles of democratic accountability and constitutional order. Furthermore, the evidence points beyond merely working against the system to a coherent effort aimed at dismantling key components of that system and replacing them with an alternative model of governance. The explicit, stated goal of Project 2025, to deconstruct the administrative state, is a clear declaration of this intent. 60. The project's detailed plans to purge the nonpartisan civil service and replace it with political loyalists via Schedule F, to bring the Department of Justice under direct political control for the purpose of punishing enemies, and to eliminate or seize control of independent agencies, do not represent reforms within the existing constitutional framework. 61. Rather, they constitute a blueprint for a systematic dismantling of the post-Watergate model of American government, which was built on the independence of its core institutions. The intended result of these actions, if fully realized, would be the creation of what constitutional scholars and historians have termed an imperial presidency. 18. This would be a system of highly centralized, personalized presidential power, where their checks and balances of the other branches have been significantly eroded and their administrative state has been transformed from an impartial implementer of law into a loyal instrument of the chief executive. This model of governance is fundamentally at odds with the Madisonian design of the U.S. Constitution. Historians and comparative political scientists have noted that this combination of anti-democratic rhetoric, their personalization of power, and attacks on core institutions bears a resemblance to the patterns of democratic backsliding observed in other nations that have transitioned toward autocracy. 14.6.3 The trajectory of American democracy. The Trump presidency represents what numerous constitutional scholars and historians have described as an unprecedented stress test for the American democratic system. 17 The actions and rhetoric documented in this report have not only challenged specific policies but have also assaulted the foundational constitutional principles and norms that have long guided the functioning of the republic. By questioning the legitimacy of elections, attacking the independence of the judiciary, and seeking to transform the civil service into a partisan tool, these efforts have accelerated existing trends of political polarization and eroded public trust in democratic institutions. 39 Historians note that while the American system has faced crises before, the current challenge is unique in that it originates from the head of the executive branch itself. wielding the powers of the presidency to undermine the very system he is sworn to uphold. 18. The long-term consequences of this challenge are still unfolding. The resilience of American democracy does not reside in its founding documents alone. As scholars have noted, the rule of law is not self-executing. 17. Its survival depends on the active defense of its principles by other institutional actors, the courts, Congress, state and local officials, as well as by civil society, the press, and an engaged citizenry. 17. The evidence compiled and analyzed in this report demonstrates a profound, systematic, and ongoing challenge to the American establishment of government. Their patterns of executive aggrandizement, institutional delegitimization, and their personalization of power, codified in the blueprint of Project 2025, present a coherent vision for transforming the American Republic into a system dominated by a powerful, unconstrained executive. Whether this vision is ultimately